So we have promises of action from political leaders in the aftermath of the death of the 4 family members killed in that hit-and-run attack in London, Ontario. What does the Muslim community want to see by way of real action and real change from our political leaders? Nadia Hasan is the Chief Operating Officer of the National Council of Canadian Muslims, and Nawaz Tahir is a lawyer in London, Ontario, and the chair of London's anti-Islamophobia advocacy organization, Hikma. He was one of the speakers at the vigil Tuesday night. Thank you both for taking time to speak with me today, and I offer my condolences to both of you for the loss of these 4 members of the community. And thanks for taking time to speak with me tonight. Nadia, let me start with you. There have been calls for a national summit on Islamophobia. Who would be at that summit, and what would be the objective of that summit?
That's a good question. I think the purpose of that summit is really to tackle Islamophobia in all its forms. We know that what happened in London is something that is rooted in a deep-seated Islamophobia that individual harbored, and that doesn't come out of nowhere. It's not something that, just happens in a vacuum. However, what we want to see is multiple levels of government. So that includes our federal leaders from all political parties, provincial leaders, as well as municipal and territorial leaders, to come together and talk about the problem of Islamophobia, what they can do within their own jurisdictions, because this is a problem that requires a whole of society approach.
Mr. Tahir, lots of promises of action from political leaders of all stripes. What do you want to see beyond the calling of a summit, important in and of itself, but what specifically do you think our political leaders need to be looking at to fight Islamophobia in this country and these acts of violence against Muslim Canadians?
So I think there are a few specific pieces to the puzzle. One, we need to give our police forces across Canada the opportunity and the resources to research all that is out there. We know that in a number of these attacks, the attackers, the terrorists that have done this, have been online. And we know that in the dark web, that type of a community exists. So we need to give police officers, law enforcement agencies across the country the tools to be able to properly research, understand what's going on there, so that if God forbid, an attack like this were to happen, it has been properly researched and those hate crime charges or terrorism charges can go ahead. We also need specific legislation, hate crime legislation that has teeth to it, that doesn't handcuff police or handcuff the prosecution.
I mean, is one of the big issues that we look at the laws in this country, and typically the terrorism laws in the country are dealing with measures aimed at trying to prevent terrorist attacks before they happen. And there's certainly lots of discussion, and I think you might be alluding to it here, but the need to make terrorism charges easier to lay after a crime has been committed. Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, both terrorism charges and hate crime charges. The legislation needs to have more teeth to allow these to be investigated more properly and allow these charges to come forward without some of the additional barriers that have been created in the current manifestations of the legislation.
Nadia, let me ask you, in this same context, why is it important? We heard, not all, but most of the political leaders we've been hearing from on this have been able to refer to this as terrorism. Why is it so important to have them call it that and for police to pursue it as that?
I think that it is extremely important that our political leaders call it that, because that is what it is. And I think it's simply a matter of accuracy, a matter of actually recognizing something that has all the hallmarks of a terrorist act as a terrorist act. And we had an opportunity to do that previously in the Quebec City massacre, which didn't happen. But this time, I think we want to hear from our leadership that they do acknowledge that this is indeed a form of terrorism. But secondarily, I think what it does is that it sends a message. And the message is that crimes of this nature that are fueled by hate and Islamophobia, that they will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And that's a really important message for all Canadians to hear, and for all Canadians to understand that our governments actually have our safety in mind.
Mr. Tahir, we've seen some politicians talk about their concerns about balancing tougher measures to deal with hate crimes and Islamophobia, but also their concerns about balancing free speech. What's your message to them?
My message to them at the vigil and my message to them today is the same. What is the point of having freedom of expression when a Canadian family does not have the freedom to walk on a sidewalk without being murdered?
Okay, so elaborate on that for me. I mean, if some politicians try to make this argument that, look, okay, we're prepared to go further, but we do have to be careful about when free speech extends, how to make sure that we haven't shut down free speech. So, in that context, is there a way to discuss that balance and to achieve that balance?
Well, we know even in Canada's constitutional system that freedom of expression is not absolute. Through legislation, through civil law remedies, and even our Constitution itself says that those freedoms have to be reasonably limited in a free and democratic society. So we know that there are already some parameters over that, and we need to talk about and think about how this affects the ability of people to feel like they belong in our country and are valued people and members of our community.
Nadia, we've seen in some previous elections campaigns, we've seen some politicians exploit differences in communities rather than celebrate them. We could soon be in another federal election campaign. What's your message to the political parties?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that the politics of division, they don't work and they have consequences. It's really important right now for our political leaders to understand this, as you said, as we're heading into an election. But really, there are lives at stake here. And that's not an exaggeration. Their words matter, how they handle themselves, how they ensure that there is no place for Islamophobia or racism or xenophobia within their parties. Those are really important steps to take going into an election.
Mr. Tahir, you spoke at the vigil last night, and I thought it was interesting. You related the story of how a foreign reporter asked you how come this is happening in Canada, viewed as one of the most tolerant countries in the world. You told us about the question he asked you, but I didn't hear you answer the question. What did you say to that reporter who said, how is this happening in Canada?
Well, what I said to him is this is a problem that isn't unique to Canada. Well, we're seeing examples of Islamophobia around the world, and how Muslims are being treated around the world, and there are a number of examples of that. And so Canada isn't unique, and we need to come together from a worldwide perspective in addressing this issue of hate.
All right. Let's see where this takes us in terms of future actions and next steps by political leaders in this country. Thank you both for your time tonight. It's good to talk to you. And again, my condolences for the losses in your community.
Thank you.
Thank you.